Hello, everybody. Welcome to uh, this week's discussion, and welcome back from spring break. I uh, may have forgotten that spring break was last week. Again, apologies. This is my first spring semester teaching, so I actually forgot that spring break was a thing on the schedule. Um, but now that that's out of the way, let's get into today's topic, which is the analyzing video game franchises through history. There are a lot of enduring franchises in video games, several of them you can see here. Some of which are newer than others, some of which have been around forever. Some are more or less non existent anymore. Um, some that are far more successful than others in multiple forms of media. So we're going to discuss a little bit about what makes these franchises successful over long periods of time, how a video game franchise is kind of solidified in uh, the history of video gaming, and what these franchises are doing to stay fresh and relevant over time. So let's talk about how franchises become successful, and how you can come from a one-off video game to a franchise with multiple sequels and characters that are synonymous with video gaming, such as Mario or Sonic. Um, the first point here is longevity. Obviously, the longer a video game franchise has been around, the more uh, titles that the franchise produces, the more successful that it will be over time. Even in slumps for certain franchises with poorly reviewed or poorly received games, those franchises still or have been able to still last. A lot of that comes from the kind of longevity that those franchises had up until that point. A good example of one of those being a more recent thing, I think, is Halo, where the franchise itself kind of solidified itself in the 2000s as the um, revolution in first person shooters. But since Halo Infinite didn't do very well, and Halo 5, I guess, didn't do super well either, since then, there hasn't been really much relevant Halo content in the past couple of years. But if you talk to anybody about, Master Chief, who has played a game in the past 20 years, they probably have some idea of who Master Chief is. Next up, another tent pole of video game franchise success is sales figures. So we'll discuss this a little bit when we start talking about these games, these franchises. But as we've discussed in the past, successful games, games that make money, get sequels. So if a game franchise, Super Mario Brothers, for instance, made Nintendo a lot of money, so they continued making Super Mario Brothers games, and they continued to make Nintendo a lot of money. So then it became the mascot franchise for Nintendo. That is important because as an industry, a lot of times franchises, while they are not necessarily taking risks or treading new ground, they are consistent money makers for developers and for publishers. Next up, we'll talk about cultural impact. how these games have influenced things outside of the video gaming itself, whether that's merchandise, adaptations, as we'll discuss in a little bit, through other media like TV shows and movies, um, or whether it's something that makes its way into other forms of media through pop culture. Um, how often is Mario or Sonic or Master Chief or whatever, Pikachu, referenced in other TV shows or other movies and other video games, things like that. That is a gauge of the cultural impact of a video game franchise, of any franchise, really. And then the last thing is the critical acclaim. Successful video game franchises, like, they start out, they have to make a lot of money, but they also have to be good games. And one of the reasons, even like early on, they have to be consistently good games. So one of the reasons why Mario, Sonic, Pokemon are all as big as they are as video game franchises is um, their first entry into their series was good, was, great, a classic, however you want to describe those games. But then they were consistently able to make sequels to those games that were also very good. Whether or not the quality has dipped or increased over time, or uh, in some circumstances is non-existent for certain franchises, it is kind of a curve that uh, works itself out over time. But the important thing to cement a franchise at its foundation is to consistently make good titles in that franchise that consistently do well, sales wise and review wise. So let's talk about some of the oldest franchises in video game history, and some that are doing incredibly well. Some maybe even the best that they could be now. So I don't think I probably most. I'm not going to assume that everybody knows these uh, these properties, but I can assume. I think I can gather that people who have played video games or who are interested in gaming are at least aware of one or more of these four here. We have Super Mario Brothers, the flagship of Nintendo since the 80s, has that's actually kind of, is that 1985? Is that the Japanese release year? Because that would mean 40th anniversary this year, which is kind of cool. It kind of created the modern platformer or the classic platformer design genre out of the four home consoles in the 80s and 90s. Next up, we have Pokemon, which Pokemon, I believe, is now considered. It's either the most profitable or second most profitable franchise in all of media. It's either first or second to Disney properties. Pokemon is 20 years ago. Pokemon would not have been as people would have talked about Pokemon, would know Pokemon. It was a craze in the 90s. It was very very relevant in the 90s, but people would not necessarily have had it in regular conversation outside of video games in the early 2000s, the mid 2000s, whereas today, I think Pikachu is actually the most recognizable character next to Mickey Mouse in the world. So it's something that is exploded in popularity when it first came out, and then, as I've stated, that the having critical acclaim, continued making improvements and better sequels over its first several iterations, several first couple of decades. You can talk about whether or not most recent titles are good or not. Doesn't necessarily mean that the Pokemon formula is not something that was widely successful in the 90s and has continued that way to today. And Pokemon is also a prime example of kind of that pop culture or the cultural relevance outside of gaming, whether it's Pokemon cards, which people are very, I think, aware of, and also very, it's it is a booming popularity in the past couple of years. Whether it's the Pokemon anime and the movies, Detective Pikachu, Pokemon's appearance in other uh, um, franchises like Super Smash Brothers. Pokemon is everywhere, one way or another. Uh, people can't not be aware of Pokemon. I think in 2025. Um, Next up is The Legend of Zelda, another one of the flagship kind of franchises for Nintendo, where when it first released, it was kind of the original adventure, action adventure series. Um, it was one of the first things to combine kind of an open world map with puzzle solving and combat and boss fights and that like overarching storyline in an action game, and has continued to like iterate upon itself with every single release, whether it's between the 2D Zelda style of the original or Link to the Past, where to its jump to 3D with Ocarina of Time and Majora's Mask, to its um, interesting use of mechanics such as the Wiimote in Twilight Princess, things like that, all the way to its kind of renaissance with Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, with its use of physics as well as open world adventure, RPG elements, and um, player freedom. I think that's kind of like hallmark of Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom. Zelda is just something that is consistently done very good. Improvements upon itself and release after release, and still kind of captured that original feeling of action adventure, puzzle solving, dungeon exploring. Um, and then there's Sonic the Hedgehog, which is the original mascot for Sega, for the Sega Genesis, the rival to Mario in the console wars. Sonic's had very up and down kind of um, history in its franchise, from being the rival to Mario, outperforming a couple different releases versus Mario, to the fall of Sega as a console creator, to being integrated into or alongside of Mario in certain releases, to being its own thing. And now it's back to another renaissance of not even necessarily about its games, which are fine, but in other media through the movies. All right, and so that's in the 80s and 90s. So let's jump forward to the late 90s, early 2000s, the beginning of 3D gaming, and kind of the things that defined genres within 3D gaming for decades, and also even to now. Um, I think I discussed this in not last week, but the week before last, before spring breaks, discussion about Final Fantasy VII, where Final Fantasy VII is kind of that revolutionary tentpole of the RPG, the JRPG genre, where it combined Final Fantasy's first jump into 3D with a very high quality storytelling and cinematic um, experiences, cutscenes, and deep characters and emotional um, story beats and things like that, as well as iterating and improving upon the kind of classic turn-based RPG combat and exploration, item collecting, secret finding, things like that. Final Fantasy VII kind of paves the way for additional Final Fantasy games over the next 30 years, and nine major iterations and a bunch of side games. There's a lot of Final Fantasy games out there, but it also created kind of an opening for other franchises within the genre, um, alongside other tentpole for JRPGs, Dragon Quest, um, where you now have your the Shimigami Tensei games, um, the Tales games, things like that that are kind of elevated by the things that Final Fantasy VII did in the 90s. And next up, we have Grand Theft Auto, specifically Grand Theft Auto 3 in 2001, which kind of defines open world gaming all the way to today. It is kind of that the blueprint for open world adventure and player freedom, and allowing players to do kind of whatever they want, giving them a lot of things to do, and having the freedom to not have to stand on rails from beginning to end of a story or beginning to end of a gameplay loop. Grand Theft Auto had already done this a couple of times, or with previous iterations of it, with Grand Theft Auto 1 and 2, the original 2D Grand Theft Auto games, but Grand Theft Auto 3 broke that out into 3D, created a massive, reasonably massive, I guess. The Grand Theft Auto 3 map may not be as crazy big as other Grand Theft Auto maps, but creating that kind of like living world, 3D open world in Liberty City, and filling it with a ton of things for players to do. And then just kind of letting players have fun in that sandbox, not even necessarily requiring them to do anything story or level progression wise to be able to unlock things, to do any. They just have access to it through their own exploration. This formula really hasn't changed very much, kind of all the way to now with Grand Theft Auto 5 and eventually Grand Theft Auto 6, whenever that comes out, where you have that same idea, massive open world map, sandbox, go and have fun, do whatever you want to do, commit whatever crimes, blow up whatever cars, steal whatever, or play through the actual story. The only addition is, since Grand Theft Auto 4, Grand Theft Auto 5, you now have online play, which allows people to do it with their friends. So Grand Theft Auto, I think, is going to continue to be, unless something absolutely tragic happens with Grand Theft Auto 6, I think it's going to continue to be that kind of benchmark for massive open world, free roam player experiences. Next up is Halo, which the first-person shooter genre in general has had a lot of evolution over its lifetime, between Doom and Castle Wolfenstein, and your 3D arena shooters like Unreal Tournament, or Quake, all the way to Halo. Halo wasn't necessarily revolutionary in any of the gameplay ideas in it. You don't. The first-person shooter multiplayer experience was really defined through like GoldenEye on the Nintendo 64, Quake, and Unreal Tournament. But what Halo did was really kind of define very high quality control. Like, it really kind of standardized the FPS control style, as well as the makeup of the multiplayer experience. So Halo made it a lot easier for people to get into multiplayer games through Xbox Live. Made it a lot easier to play co-op games, and had a sizable campaign for single players. And then also made it a lot easier to play those games on controllers, with a lot of complex control interactions between grenades, multiple gun combinations, uh, shields, melee attacks, crouches, all that stuff. And Halo just kind of really kind of like set the standard for that in 2001, and then iterated upon that in most of its sequels, and kind of until most recently, I guess, continued to create a quality, solid product through each of its releases. Then there's The Sims. The Sims, the Sim games, whether it's The Sims, Sim City, Sim. Well, I mean, I was going to say Sim Roller Coaster Tycoon, but Roller Coaster Tycoon. Um, Up until the release of The Sims, these simulation games had existed one way or another, all the way back in as early as Oregon Trail, um, where simulating kind of mundane or otherwise not necessarily fantastical conditions and interactions in a set environment wasn't really something that was particularly exciting in video gaming. It wasn't the fantastical worlds of Zelda or Pokemon or Halo. The Sims itself actually kind of created uh, the depth of real life simulation, and allowed players a lot of freedom to create a second life for themselves in the game. And The Sims actually did a really good job at pulling players in that didn't otherwise play video games. A lot of people who are traditionally very into The Sims uh, do not play as many games as many other games from other genres as other players or other gamers. So The Sims got a lot of honestly, The Sims got a lot of girls and women into gaming. It got a lot of family members, older family generations into gaming, things like that. Because the idea of kind of having your own reality TV style simulation that you can have. The fantasy is you can have your character do whatever you would like them to do as successful or unsuccessful human beings, was really novel. And it did a really good job at pulling people into that. Since then, the franchise itself has spawned 3 major titles, a couple of different um, things within the franchise that are within a similar style of gameplay, made by similar or the same studio, Maxis, or studios owned by EA. And The Sims 5, I think, is coming out this year or next year. And it kind of created its own like simulation genre, like life simulation genre, um, which is, again, popular with non-traditional gamers, um, more than it is popular with uh, other gamers, or more than not other gamers. Now we go to the 2010s, where I think I said this last time, cell phones, where mobile gaming became kind of the revolution of mobile gaming, where it became phones became a lot more powerful and able to handle um, larger experiences. You get bigger screens, touch screen capability, internet connections, things like that, that allow gaming to kind of branch off and be on similar quality levels as console or PC gaming, while also being playable on a weaker or smaller device. I'm going to go through these real quick, because I think a lot of these are less relevant now than they were when they came out, but are surprisingly still making a lot of money today. The longevity of these titles, I think, is kind of the um, the highlight of them. Angry Birds. Uh, I think that Angry Birds is something that a lot of most people can probably identify as a classic um, mobile game. Uh, Branched out into the movies. I think there's two. TV show. I think Angry Birds, kind of like that like first viral mobile gaming hit. Candy Crush Saga kind of started the match 3 craze in mobile gaming. It also started and kind of solidified the idea of microtransaction in-app purchases in gaming. So a lot of what you see with the time gated energy things, or the small boost power ups and experience modifiers and things like that you can purchase as microtransactions in mobile games. A lot of that can be traced back to Candy Crush, because Candy Crush said, "Hey, what if we forced people to not be able to play the game all the time, but then told them if they wanted to, they could pay money to get the ability to do that," and they've made billions of dollars doing it. Pokemon Go. Actually, I should have switched these on the thing. So I'm going to talk Clash of Clans first, because Clash of Clans, I think, is kind of an evolution of Candy Crush, where Clash of Clans added a strategy element to mobile gaming on top of the in-app purchases and microtransactions and things that kind of were created or were brought up by Candy Crush, to allow more depth in gameplay while also making a lot of money off microtransactions. Clash of Clans also happens to be kind of, I guess, the prototype for kind of the modern mobile game, the gotcha game strategy of, there's a lot of microtransactions, but there's a lot of what it's really doing is it's giving you two games in one, where on the free to play side you can play, you're time gated, you're not going to advance nearly as much, but if you pay additional money, not only will you advance faster, but you'll have access to exclusive things. It provides a single player experience and a multiplayer experience at the same time, that are, one leads into the other. So your single player experience adds things to the multiplayer experience. And then finally, let's go back to Pokemon Go. For mobile gaming in the 2010s, Pokemon Go became kind of the flashpoint for mobile gaming, and that up until that point, hundreds of millions of people were mobile gaming in some amount, but not a lot were doing it at a very consistent rate. So you'll have the occasional person who will bring up Candy Crush Saga every single day and play their levels that they're allowed to play, and then go about their day. Clash of Clans, you'll have people doing the same thing, do the things, the upgrades and stuff that they're allowed to do, and then go about their day. Pokemon Go kind of was the real, like, this game gets people playing it consistently and constantly over the day. When it was released in 2016, it combined the franchise, the already beloved franchise Pokemon, with, at the time, revolutionary augmented reality gameplay, and real world locations, and allowed players. 1 second. My chair is sliding. And allowed players to play Pokemon, collect their favorite Pokemon while also being outside and getting some exercise and exploring their world, the actual world. And it really kind of, there was this kind of renaissance where people would play Pokemon Go, would go to locations and play Pokemon Go for hours on end with other people who also played Pokemon Go, and they would walk around their cities or their suburbs or a park or whatever and discover the Pokemon that were available in the area. There were communities where there were times where players found out that there were exclusive Pokemon available in certain areas in the world, in order to collect them before certain trading things were made it a lot easier to collect Pokemon. You would have to, or you'd be incentivized. People have actually done this to travel outside of your hometown or outside of your home country to find these Pokemon. And this was something that it's interesting because it seems kind of excessive if you think about it. If you wanted to go to, I think Japan had Snorlax. It seems kind of excessive to be like, oh, I'm going to travel to Japan to catch a Snorlax or whatever. But I mean, that's the kind of thing that if you were, I went to Japan in 2016, not to catch a Snorlax, but I was there. I think it was Snorlax. It might have been Farfetch'd. I don't remember which Pokemon was exclusive, but the idea is that I was in Japan in 2016 and I did play Pokemon Go, and I made it a point to wander through Tokyo playing Pokemon Go to try to find that exclusive Pokemon. It's just that it was a new kind of angle in gaming that was very unique at the time, especially, and I think since it hasn't really been replicated particularly well. Anyway, so that's kind of the mobile gaming breakdown. Since then, mobile gaming has evolved into those, like I said before, those gacha games or mobile ports of classic games you can play. I think Final Fantasy all the way up to 10 on mobile now. You might be able to play 12 now. I'm not sure. So big single player experiences and things are also available on mobile. Classic games, all sorts of stuff. Mobile gaming is huge. It's here to stay. We might not like kind of the monetary monetization of those games, but it exists. But the question is, because we're talking about franchises, what happened to any of these franchises? Because they all still exist. You know, you can play Angry Birds or Candy Crush or whatever, but like, are there as many iterations of Angry Birds as there are Mario games? And no, there's not. Mobile games seem to buck the trend a little bit for what we would consider success in successful video game franchises, in that they're not necessarily expanding linearly and creating sequels upon sequels upon sequels, because they don't need to, because these games were kind of the introduction to the live service model. So while I do believe there are sequels to Angry Birds, Candy Crush, and Clash of Clans, and a bunch of the other kind of tentpole mobile games from the 2010s, there are not as many as you would think there would be, considering how long these games have existed, because the only thing that they need to do is to update the game with new content. And that's, I think, something that delivery platform became kind of novel with mobile gaming, and has now, cemented itself in traditional platform or platform gaming and or console gaming and PC gaming. So there may not be a million Angry Birds games. I think that there are like maybe half a dozen, but there may not be a million of them, but there doesn't need to be, because they just need to be updated with new content without actually adding a complete additional title, which isn't something that they're incentivized to do, because most of these games are free to play and have those microtransactions as their monetization. So they're less likely to want to develop an entire new game, because they're not trying to sell you a physical copy of the game. Which brings us to modern gaming and where we are in these AAA franchises of today. Um, Obviously, these are probably some of the biggest that I haven't already talked about because I didn't want to include Grand Theft Auto. I guess I have talked about, but I didn't include Pokemon in this. But these franchises are kind of the hallmark of their genres, and the uh, most consistently iterated upon for their franchises. And then there's League of Legends, which I'll get to in a second. Minecraft's huge, enormous franchise, maybe the most played game franchise of the 2010s. Not sure about that actually, but um, obviously it's Minecraft. I think it's one of the things because of how influential and popular it was with children in the 2010s and 20 and the 20s. Now, I guess um, parents and children alike know of Minecraft. Minecraft is used in educational settings. Minecraft is uh, used in programming, in video game development itself. There's the Minecraft movie that's coming out this year. There's a lot of things that Minecraft has kind of bled into. That's not just Minecraft itself, because Minecraft, like other kind of live service games, I say live service because Minecraft does get updates over time, but it's not like a battle pass kind of thing. Minecraft's franchise is not just the core game, but also its spin-offs through dungeons and story mode and um, the toy lines and the movie. Um, but it's, with its freedom and its infinitely large world to interact in, Minecraft is um, kind of that franchise that will not will not be going anywhere anytime soon, because it's so easy to kind of interact with Minecraft as a franchise for a very long time. Um, and it really does kind of follow, like I said, the idea of that live service where um, the people who own it will continue to own it for a long time, and will play it for a long time. But the things that they are buying are within the franchise, but are spinoffs. Minecraft's an interesting one, but it's also kind of not really going anywhere. Um, Much like Grand Theft Auto, which is our next one. So Grand Theft Auto 5, um, highest grossing physical video game sales, I think, of all time. Grand Theft Auto's Grand Theft Auto makes Rockstar, the or the developer, a lot of money. I think it's something close to $2 billion a year um, on Grand Theft Auto 5 and online sales. It's one of the largest franchises in existence. It's caused issues with regulations and censorship, and it's hit mainstream stuff, mainstream news cycles and things for many years. And as I've talked about it before, so I won't go into super in depth, but it is continuing that idea of the open world, player freedom, and um, continuing to create new um, entries into the franchise, with Grand Theft Auto 6 coming out early next year, maybe. And the next up is Call of Duty. I've talked about Call of Duty, I think, extensively over this course, but Call of Duty is kind of the flagship first-person shooter live service, multiplayer experience. And Call of Duty is the point where, as a franchise, it gets new iterations pretty much every year, and on top of that, also has live service um, updates constantly through its Warzone multiplayer. Um, I don't really have anything else to say about Call of Duty other than it is, the most popular first person shooter in the world, and probably will continue to be for a very long time. And now we get to League of Legends, where League of Legends is an incredibly uh, popular active live service game. It's a MOBA. It is not the creator of the MOBA genre, but kind of it's a refinement of the MOBA genre. So, um, where League of Legends um, combines kind of the MOBA gameplay with monetization through skins and battle passes and live service things, and then really jumps on the idea of esports, where you take a um, you take a very popular game franchise and create a competition, a professional level competition around it, where league like championship series events and stuff have thousands of people at, and are very similar to actual like live sporting events. So League of Legends kind of revolutionized the esports idea, and has become, I think, the driving force in esports monetarily, um, in modern gaming. But League of Legends is not necessarily a franchise in that it doesn't have multiple entries into its um, into its main line of games. However, League of Legends is doing something that I think a lot of video games are starting to do now, and that's branch out into um, a lot of different forms of media, which I'll get to in a second once I reset our recording. Okay, and we're back. So all of this kind of leads into this wider umbrella of media consumption, and um, as a successful franchise, a lot of times it's kind of this reverse. Um, I was gonna say funnel, but maybe a kind of a reverse funnel where a lot of franchises, a lot of media franchises, say movies or TV shows, go from being a um, movie or a TV show, and then eventually getting a video game adaptation, and then maybe a TV show or a movie adaptation. It kind of goes down that list. Gaming kind of started. It's kind of doing a reverse of that, where the most popular video game franchises, a lot of which are here on these posters, um, are becoming these IPs are becoming um, or branching out into other forms of media. So Mario had the movie last year before. Sonic has now had 3 movies. Cyberpunk, Arcane, The Witcher. Um, I'm sure there's Castlevania, Devil May Cry. All of these game genres are now getting TV shows, whether they're animated like those or live action, like The Last of Us. A lot more video game franchises are becoming um, other forms of media as well. And this is kind of where I was leading into with League of Legends, where League of Legends doesn't have multiple games in its franchise. It doesn't have multiple titles. What it does have is multiple forms of media. So Arcane is, I think, the most obvious one, most recent one, and also, I think, probably its most successful one. But League of Legends also has short form video content through. They did some animation things, animated scenes from the story, the lore of the game. It has its own. I think it's just one, but I could be wrong. It has its own K-pop group with KDA. If you haven't heard any of that, it's basically a bunch of the characters from League of Legends as K-pop idols, and there's albums of music through that. Um, League of Legends really branched out into not just being um, the game itself. There's a card game. There is a digital card game called Legends of Runeterra that I think is still. I don't know if that's still around or still doing as well as it was, but I think it's still available. There's a physical trading card game that's coming out with League of Legends this year or next year. Um, they're doing a lot of different things that aren't just the video game. But it's all kind of working its way into becoming part of the franchise of League of Legends. Um, I say all this being not a fan of MOBAs and not a player of League. I did very much enjoy Arcane, but that's the idea. I think, and branching out to all those different forms of media is that there are ways to get people into the franchises without um, having to interact with all of them. Cyberpunk with Edge Runners created kind of a desire to play the game, which, as I've said before, injected life into the game, created or gave them a reason to uh, update the game, fix it, and um, do the expansion to it. Um, whereas things like Super Mario Brothers, Sonic the Hedgehog, the movies and the games, movies are just kind of additional ways to experience the characters in the game world. Um, but those are all the different ways that video game franchises have been branching out and can branch out. There's a bunch of additional things. Pokemon cards is, I think, one of the most obvious ones. The Pokemon TV show and the movies and such. Um, and then there's appearances in other games and things. The idea, as we're getting into here, is you want to create this longevity, and these are the factors that are required to create that. Um, Consistent quality, strong characters, um, adaptability, and community engagement. So consistent quality, again, as I said before, especially at the beginning of a franchise, the games themselves have to be good, and they have to be something that people want to play more of, So with um, Mario, Sonic, Pokemon, Zelda, the first games were good, and the sequels had to be similarly good for people to keep buying them, especially in the early times of gaming when physical cartridge sales were the only thing that mattered. Um, but the reason for a lot of these games doing well and having these worlds, especially branching out into other forms of media or other forms of or things within a franchise, they need to have strong characters, identifiable characters, mascots. Mario, Sonic, Pikachu, uh, Link. I was trying to go through all of the things that we talked about. Master Chief. I mean, even things we haven't talked about. Crash Bandicoot, Lara Croft, Jinx or Vi or insert arcane character. These things, these characters are the things that people play as, the things that they identify with, and having those strong kind of mascots for your franchise are very important. Certain franchises that fail to get off the ground, especially in the mid late 90s, things that you may have heard of, may have seen seen memes of or whatever, things like Gex the Gecko, Blinks, I think that was it, Blinks, things that don't exist anymore, like Sly Cooper, or Jack and Daxter, stuff like that, that were at one point big franchises or had the potential to be big franchises that just didn't stick because the characters weren't interesting enough to the audience. Adaptability requires these games, the characters, the universes, the different interactions in different media to evolve through changes in technology. So you see the iteration between um, the original Legend of Zelda, that kind of like open world puzzle action adventure style gameplay, through to 3D with Ocarina of Time and Majora's Mask, through to using the different mechanics on Nintendo's consoles to its advantage, through to the current evolution where Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom are completely giant open world, physics based, very player free, a lot of freedom to do what you want. Those kinds of games. That adaptability has allowed Zelda to continue to be a relevant franchise 40 years later. And the final thing is community engagement. So this is something that leads a little bit into marketing, as well as branching out into those movies and TV shows and things, in ways that the community builds upon itself, requires the franchises themselves to kind of cultivate a dedicated fan base. And those dedicated fan bases, if they're large enough, can really kind of hold hold the franchise afloat, even if there's kind of a drought for content from that franchise. I think Zelda. I was going to say Zelda. I think Sonic is probably the biggest example here, where the fan base and the fan community for Sonic, I think, is very ravenous for the Sonic universe. And Pokemon is similar in that there are so many people who are fans of Pokemon, but the actual Pokemon fan base, those that kind of consume Pokemon on all levels, they're very dedicated to the franchise itself. Okay, so that should be everything for this week. Thanks, everybody. I will be posting discussions and all that stuff by tonight, tomorrow morning. So please make sure you check the discussions and do those. I will also have all of the grades for everything that I haven't done for the course available. Hopefully end of day tomorrow or Thursday at the latest. So I apologize for that. I kind of let that back up and not grade when I was supposed to, and I apologize. Thanks, everybody. See y'all next week.